Chapter 12, Marriage and Family. The practices of marriage and family differ around the world. We are going to look at marriage and the family as a social institution, and just like other social institutions, it changes as the culture changes. The different types of stratification, the things we just talked about, race, gender, class, and even age, define family life and influence the social relationships that develop among family members. Different family patterns exist and have changed over time. The difference exists from culture to culture and even within the same culture. What remains constant is that family is universal. That is, family is found in every culture. Every human group organizes its members into families. How families are organized, however, varies greatly from culture to culture. Defining what is the family should be easy, but it is not because of the many variations. For example, your book, author James Henslin broadly defines the family as two or more people who consider themselves related by blood, marriage, or adoption. The Census Bureau has its own definition. They define the family according to household. Family is hard to define because there are many types. So yes, family is hard to define because there are many types. And so what is a family? Family is people who consider themselves related by blood, marriage, or adoption. A household are people who occupy the same housing unit. In some societies, men have more than one wife. Call this polygyny, P-O-L-Y-G-Y-N-Y. Or women have more than one husband, and that's polyandry, P-O-L-Y-A-N-D-R-Y. But even with these variations, we do find some common themes in composition, classification, kinship patterns, descent, and authority patterns. So family is classified as a nuclear family or extended family. A nuclear family is made up of a husband, a wife, and their unmarried children. An extended family is made up of the nuclear family plus other relatives like grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. We also define the family of orientation, which is the family in which a person grows up in. And the family of procreation is the family formed when a child is born. A person who is married but has not had a child is part of a couple, not quite a family yet. So what is marriage? We have the same challenges defining marriage that we do defining family. Many groups have various customs regarding marriage or family. Opposite-sex marriage is often taken for granted. But in the 1980s and 1990s, several European countries legalized same-sex marriage. In 2003, so did Canada. In 2004, Massachusetts was the first state in the United States to legalize same-sex marriage. Currently, in all states in the U.S., it is legal. There are marriages based on love, and there are what are called arranged marriages. So with all these variations, we can define marriage as the group's approved dating arrangements, usually marked by a ritual, the wedding, to show the couple's new public status. As already mentioned, there are some common cultural themes that run through marriage and family. So let's look at patterns of mate selection, patterns of descent, inheritance, and patterns of authority. Universally, marriage and family are the mechanism for governing mate selection, reckoning descent, and establishing inheritance and authority. First, patterns of mate selection are established to determine who one can and cannot marry. Endogamy is the term we use for the practicing of marriage, marrying within one's own group. So in other words, marrying someone of the same race and the same religion. You're marrying within a group. While exogamy is the practice of marrying outside of your group. In other words, people must marry outside of their group, like their family. Now, some of these norms of mate selection are written into law, but others are very informal. For example, we have the incest taboo, and the incest taboo is an example of exogamy in that it prohibits sex and marriage among relatives. We also have three major patterns of descent. This is the way we track our kinship over generations. In the US, we use a bilateral system of descent, traced to both mother's and father's side. And some use patrilineal, or tracing the father's side, and don't think of children as being related to the mother's relatives. Others use matrilineal descent and trace the mother's side only. Mate selection and descent are regulated in all societies in order to provide a system of passing property and other things to the next generation. Inheritance: in bilateral system, property passes to males and females. In patrilineal, passes only to the males, and in matrilineal, property passes only to females. All societies reflect some patterns of authority. In a patriarchy, men dominate women in the social system. No historical records exist of a true matriarchy where women as a group dominate men as a group. And in the US, we are moving toward a more egalitarian pattern of authority, where it is more or less divided equally between men and women. But our customs still reflect a patriarchy. Typically, women take the name of the husband, and children take the name of their father. In this table, you will see common cultural themes: marriage in traditional versus industrialized societies. In the far left column, you'll see the characteristic, and then it will be compared the traditional society versus industrial and post-industrial societies. Next, theory. We're going to examine the various theoretical perspectives of the family, marriage in the family: the functionalist perspective, the conflict perspective, and the symbolic interactionist perspective. The functionalist perspective stresses how the family is related to other parts of society and how it contributes to the well-being of society. According to functionalists, the family is universal because it serves functions essential to the well-being of society. These 6 basic functions are economic production, the socialization of children, the care of the sick and the aged, recreation, sexual control, and reproduction. Historically, education, religion, and recreation were once functions of the family. Now, many of those activities exist outside of the family. Now, the incest taboo serves a function in that it helps the family avoid role confusion, forcing people to look outside the family for marriage partners, creating a greater social network of family support. Functionalists also note the dysfunction in family. For example, unlike the extended family who can rely on each other for emotional and material support, the nuclear family has fewer people that it can depend on. Therefore, they become exposed to emotional overload, the strain and stress of losing a job and other crises. Also, the relative isolation places family at risk of dysfunctions like various abuses that can emerge, discussed later in the chapter. Central to the conflict perspective is the struggle over power: who has it and who resents not having it. Throughout our history, husbands have had more power and wives have resented it. Yet in the United States, wives have been gaining more power in marriage. According to figure 12-1, wives are currently making more decisions at home than men. For example, finances and purchases and activity planning. 43% of wives make more decisions at home: what to do on the weekends, what to watch on TV. 26% of husbands do, and 31% decisions are divided equally. Conflicts, therefore, are inevitable among two people who live intimately and share everything. And here we see the table that indicates who makes the decisions at home. And symbolic interactionists explore different meanings that gender, housework, and childcare have for men and women, and how each sex experiences marriage differently. We are witnessing a shift in gender roles. More women are in the paid labor force. More men are doing more housework. Not only are husbands spending more time caring for children, but so are wives. Parents are spending less time on social activities and organizations to allow more time to care for children. According to this table, men are spending more time on housework than in the past. Women still are doing more of it, but the combined time spent on housework by husbands and wives have dropped because of technological advances. I mean, think about it. We have fast food stores, we have dishwashers and microwave ovens and all these types of appliances to help streamline and cut down on time that consuming household tasks have taken in the past. Next, we're going to look at love, courtship, and the family life cycle. This also includes a discussion of marriage, childbirth, and child rearing. The ideological context in which Americans seek mates and form families is based on love. Love has some real physical effects on us and in our brain. Romantic love is the idea of people being sexually attracted to one another and idealizing the other. Romantic love has two components. The first is emotional and the second is cognitive. Emotional love, romantic love, is a feeling of sexual attraction. Cognitive is the feeling we describe, the label we attach as say, being in love. In Western society, romantic love is the only proper basis for marriage. In research conducted by Jankowiak and Fisher, 166 societies around the world found that the ideal of romantic love existed in 88% of them. For some, love produces marriage, and for others, marriage produces love, like the case in arranged marriage in India. When it comes to marriage, there is more to it than just being in love. Many say they were in love or fell in love when they got married. But there are social channels that put us in the place to fall in love and marry. So in other words, we have filters, and these filters produce neighborhoods and schools that follow social class and racial ethnic lines. Our selection of partner is far from random. Now, homogamy is the tendency of people with similar characteristics to marry one another, usually resulting from propinquity. And propinquity is the state of being close to someone, spatial nearness, sort of being geographically near someone, those we live near or meet at church and work and school and in our neighborhoods. Now, this is the idea that like marries like. But there's also the expression, opposites attract. So mate selection follows a pattern of age, social class, race and ethnicity, and education. Who we meet, though, and who we fall in love with is often very unpredictable. For example, interracial marriage, which has increased sharply, is an exception to these social patterns. About 8% marry someone of another race, totaling 5 million couples. One of the most dramatic changes is marriages between African Americans and whites. At one point there were anti-miscegenation laws, which were in place that prohibited interracial marriages was illegal in 40 states. You could be put in prison, especially in Mississippi. In 1967, these laws were struck down by the Loving case of Virginia versus the Supreme Court. It was taken all the way to the Supreme Court, and that law was stricken down. So we're seeing much more common marriage between races, mixed race. There are also health benefits to marriage. Among those who marry and stay married, experience the greatest of these health benefits. They tend to live longer. Married couples provide social support to each other. They encourage each other to eat right and to exercise. Physical and emotional connections are good for your health. Here we see the table that illustrates the growing marriage of whites and African Americans from 1970 to 2015. Now we'll consider childbirth and child rearing. Ideal family size is the number of children that Americans consider ideal, and this has changed over time. And there's three major reasons for the shift, especially since the 1970s. So we've had birth control, there's been the sexual revolution, and women's changed perception of work. Marital satisfaction often decreases after the birth of a child. Parenting stress means less sleep, and there's also an increase in financial expenses. Satisfaction will increase again after the youngest child starts school, which is usually around age 6, and then adolescent years come along and stress again. Husbands and wives have children for biological reasons and the satisfaction that they expect, but there are definite rewards as well as challenges. In terms of child rearing, both mothers and fathers are spending more time with their children. We also have more mothers employed outside of the home. Child care has become an issue. Child care arrangements are very similar for both married and single mothers. The main difference is the role played by fathers while the mother is at work. For married couples, almost 1 out of 4 children is cared for by the father. For single mothers, only 1 of 14 children is cared for by the father. Grandparents help fill the child care gap left by absent fathers in single mother households. About 1 in 6 children is cared for in daycare centers. Only a minority of U.S. daycare centers offers high quality care. The very low wages paid to daycare workers seems to account for this. Better quality daycare is associated with fewer children per staff worker, staff training, and early childhood development. Nannies have also become very popular among upper middle class parents. And now we're also noticing the use of Uber in helping, especially for moms and dads who are shuttling children around to different activities. So calling up an Uber and having them transported from one to another has become a child care arrangement. Social class also makes a difference in how people raise their children. According to Melvin Cohn, parents socialize children into the norms and their respective work worlds. For example, working class parents want children to conform to societal expectations. Middle class parents are more concerned that their children develop curiosity, self-expression, and self-control. And then we also have this new idea of helicopter parents. These are known as parents who sort of hover over their children and are very involved in their child's lives. This table illustrates the size of the family, the number of children that Americans think are ideal. There was a time when larger families, 3 or more children, were an ideal, and that kind of has now been declining since about 1970 or 1973. In the 1970s, and smaller families has been on the rise, anywhere from 0, 1, or 2 children. So children, families are either choosing to remain child-free, having 1 or just 2 children, and that seems to be and continues to be projected to grow. And here we see another way to illustrate this. From 1976 to 2014, the percent of families who only have 2 children has really grown, and the number of in that same time period, the number of families with 4 or more children has really declined. And this table, these pie charts illustrate who takes care of the babies while their mothers are at work. The top pie chart illustrates married couples, and the bottom is single mothers. And we see, roughly same amount of involvement, but single mothers may rely on grandparents maybe more frequently. Family transitions in the family life cycle. The later stages of family life bring both pleasure and problems. The empty nest is a married couple's situation after the last child has left home. However, the empty nest is not so empty anymore. The boomerang generation is leaving and returning home to live with parents. Also, with prolonged education and a growing cost of establishing households, U.S. children are leaving home much later or are returning after having left. As a result, 18% of all 25 to 29-year-olds are living with their parents. These adolescents, or what they're being called, are facing issues with their parents between being independent and dependent. So there's also, issues of privacy, authority, and responsibility. So whereas once, parents are thinking they're free from, their children have left the nest and now they're coming home. And so it's really putting a strain on both the parents and the children, the adult children. Widowhood. Women are more likely to face the problem of adjusting to widowhood. Not only do women live longer than men, but they also tend to marry men older than themselves. However, whether male or female, the survivor is faced with identity issues. Who he or she is, the adjustment is more difficult if the death was unexpected. There's also the widowhood effect, where the surviving spouse tends to die earlier than expected, especially for men. Now, this is an activity I usually do in the classroom, face-to-face. If you are able to click on this link while you're watching this video, I encourage you to take part, and it's a real eye-opening experience seeing how families kind of make it on little income or only having $1,000 left in their bank account. So if not, I will have this link, if it's not already posted, on e-learning, and you could take a look. And sort of, when you have time, you can go through and try this activity. It's called Life Happens, and I've done it in the past with class semester long, but this is a brief activity. It won't take you long. You don't have to interact with your Facebook account in order for it to work. You just can't choose that option. And then also at the end, when it asks for a donation, you don't have to, as philanthropic as it is, you don't have to make a donation. It will still work, the program. All right, now we're going to take a look at diversity in the U.S. among families. Family life varies widely in the U.S. Although there are some variations in family life between white, African American, Latino, Asian American, and Native American families, the primary distinctions in families were from cultural differences and social class. In other words, what that means is the primary distinction is social class, not race or ethnicity. Families of the same social class are likely to be similar regardless of their race or ethnicity. African American families of the upper class are concerned with maintaining family lineage and preserving their privilege and wealth. The middle class focuses on achievement and respectability, while poor African American families face the problems that poverty brings. Poor men are likely to have few job skills and to be unemployed, and this makes it difficult to fulfill the cultural roles of husband and father. Poor families tend to be headed by females and to have a high rate of birth to single mothers. So sharing of resources, the reliance on kin and fictive kin. So sociologists refer to people who help out in this way. Divorce and desertion are also more common among the poor. Compared to other groups, African American families are the least likely to be headed by married couples and the most likely to be headed by women. The women are also more likely to marry men who are less educated than themselves. Not surprising when we saw that African American women outnumber African American men in colleges. This is known as the marriage squeeze, where the pool of eligible partners with characteristics that match their own has shrunk. And this affects older women as well. Latino families, the effects of social class on families also apply to Latinos. Families also differ by country of origin. For example, families from Mexico are more likely to be headed by a married couple than are families from Puerto Rico. The longer that Latinos live in the U.S., the more families resemble those of middle-class Americans. Latino families are often distinguished by culture, especially the Spanish language, Roman Catholic religion, strong family orientation, familism, which is a strong family orientation, and a disapproval for divorce. Machismo is the emphasis on male strength and dominance, used to be characteristic of Latino families. This now only characterizes a small proportion of Latino husband and fathers. There is much diversity among Latino families. Social class seems to be more of a determining factor for family life. And here you'll see where much of this data is coming from is these tables, these pie charts of family structure. U.S. families with children under the age of 18, headed by mothers, fathers, and both parents. The structure of Asian American families is almost identical to that of white families. Children are most likely to grow up in a two-parent household among Asian American families. Because Asian Americans come from 20 different countries, family life varies, reflecting these different cultures. Researcher Bob Suzuki points out that while Chinese and Japanese American families have adopted the nuclear family pattern of the U.S., they have retained what are known as Confucian values. This provides a distinct framework to family life: humanism, collectivity, self-discipline, hierarchy, respect for the elderly, moderation, and duty and obligation. Asian Americans tend to be more permissive in their child rearing and more likely to use shame and guilt rather than physical punishment to control their children's behavior. Also, the more recent the immigration, the closer the family life is to that country of origin. Among Native American families, the issue is whether to follow traditional values or to assimilate. Traditional households will speak the native language, emphasize belief and values of Native Americans. The structure of Native American families is almost identical to that of Latinos, and like others, families differ by social class. Native American families are permissive with their children and avoid physical punishment. Also, elders play a much more active role in their children's families than they do in most U.S. families. They provide childcare and teach discipline to children. In sum, social class and culture help us to understand family life. The more resources a family has, the more it resembles middle-class nuclear family. Middle-class families have fewer children and fewer unmarried mothers. There is a greater emphasis on educational achievement and deferred gratification. Single-parent or one-parent families. One indication of the changing American family comes in the increase of one-parent families. Evidence in the decline in percent of children who live with two parents is where we find this evidence. This is due to the high divorce rate, but also to the sharp increase in births to unmarried mothers. Single moms also take longer to get married. The concern about single-parent families has more to do with poverty than that they are headed by a single parent. The reason for the poverty is that most one-parent families are headed by women who earn less than men. Statistics indicate that children from one-parent families are more likely to drop out of school, become delinquent, be poor as adults, divorce, and have children outside of marriage. And here we see the decline of the two-parent family, the percent of children under age 18 who live with parents from 1970 to 2020. It went from 85% in 1970, it's down to 67% in 2020. Couples without children. Couples who have chosen not to have children doubled, what it was 30 years ago. Overall, approximately 20% of U.S. married couples never have children. And although it is somewhat influenced by race and ethnicity, in general, the more education a woman has, the more likely she is to expect to bear no children. The main reason couples choose not to have children is they want to be free, to be able to change jobs or do spontaneous things like travel or have less stress. Economic reasons. They want to avoid the expenses of raising a child or the stresses associated with having children. The average cost of raising a child born in 2013 up until age 18 years old, so the cost of raising a child from birth to age 18, was $245,340. And this is according to the Department of Agriculture, the USDA. If you'd like to see the calculator that is used for this, you would go to the USDA.gov site. This is for a middle-income family. It has increased by 2% from the previous year. Now, other than economic reasons, some do not like children, and they may be in an unstable marriage, or they may feel they, will be bored. The proportion of couples who remain childless is likely to increase due to more education and careers available to women, legal abortion, advances in contraception, the high cost of child rearing, and the emphasis on owning material things. For those who make the choice not to have children, they prefer the term child-free, not childless. For many families, choice is not the reason for not having children. Many couples experience infertility or reproductive challenges. And some of these couples may adopt, while others turn to reproductive technologies. And here is the percentage of U.S. women aged 40 to 44 who have never given birth by race and ethnicity and by education. It shows that Asian Americans and white Americans have the highest percent by race and ethnicity who've never given birth by age 40 to 44 by the time they reach that age. And according to education, those with a graduate degree have the highest percent. An increasing important type of family in the U.S. are called blended families. A blended family is one whose members were once part of other families. Two divorced persons marry, bringing children into a new family unit. With divorce being so common, blended families are increasingly in number. They are increasing in number and often experience complicated family relationships. Since the writing of this textbook, some same-sex couples are allowed to marry in all 50 states. So, gay and lesbian couples can marry since June 26, 2016. Except for the sex of the individual, same-sex and heterosexual relationships are quite similar. Sociologists Philip Bloomstein and Pepper Schwartz found that same-sex couples' main struggles dealt with housework, money, careers, issues with relatives, and sexual adjustments. The same struggles as heterosexual couples. A major difference, though, is that same-sex couples face discrimination and social acceptance that can complicate a couple's relationship. Adoption by gay and lesbian couples is a controversial issue. A primary fear is that children raised by a gay or lesbian parents will be more likely to become homosexual. Studies have shown that children reared by gay and lesbian couples have about the same adjustment as those raised in heterosexual families, and the children are not more likely to have homosexual orientation. Furthermore, a study by anthropologist Eileen Lewin showed that homosexual couples look to adopt for the same reasons that heterosexual couples do: to establish a family, because they love children, provide a home for homeless children, and to give meaning to their lives. Next, we're going to take a look at some trends in U.S. families. And there are three major trends that have become apparent among U.S. families since the 1960s. So we're seeing the changing timetable of family life with marriage and childbirth, a trend in cohabitation, and the sandwich generation and elderly care. Today's average age of American brides and grooms is the oldest it has been since records first were kept, roughly approximately 26 for women and about 28 for men. This trend has been since the 1970s. As a result, the age at which U.S. women have their first child is also the highest in U.S. history, postponing marriage and postponing childbearing. While many young people postpone marriage, they have not postponed the age at which they set up house with someone. So cohabitation, another trend that is on the rise. Cohabitation is adults living together in a sexual relationship without being married. This trend has increased 12 times since the 1970s. Between 1/2 and 2/3 of couples have cohabited before their marriage. Commitment is the essential difference between cohabitation and marriage. Marriage assumes permanence. Cohabiting assumes remaining together as long as it works out. Some see cohabitation as a trial run or a prelude to marriage. According to a national sample of cohabitors, within 3 years, 40% of cohabiting couples married, 27% broke up, the rest were still cohabiting. Also, about 1/4 of all U.S. children are now born to cohabiting parents. Marriage is viewed as no longer a prerequisite to starting a family. So are there health benefits to cohabitation? Like in marriage, men get the health benefit. They live longer. Women do not experience this particular health benefit. Does cohabitation make marriage stronger? Early researchers found that couples who cohabit before marriage are more likely to divorce than couples who did not live together before marriage. Newer findings indicate that of the recently married, the divorce rate of those who did and did not cohabit before marriage is about the same. So we'll see as these findings are, we'll see if these findings hold as they continue to do research in this area. So here we have a line graph illustrating, the age and when, do Americans marry, the changing age at first marriage. So it really dipped down in the 1940s and 50s and then started to rise again after the 1970s. And here we see a table that illustrates Americans aged 20 to 24 who have married. And it compares each decade. Men are the orange bar, women are the purple bar, and from 1970 through, it goes up to 2016. And you can see the decline in the age and the percentage. Here we see the illustration of cohabitation. You can see how this line has definitely shown the dramatic increase in couples living together without being married. The sandwich generation is another growing trend. Sandwich generation refers to people who are in between generations. That is, they are responsible for the care of their children and for their own aging parents. These are people typically between the ages of 40 and 55. Often they find themselves being pulled in two directions. This responsibility typically falls on the female members of the family. We're seeing this happen because as we're seeing couples postpone, people postpone the age at which they get married, which in turn postpones the age at which they have children. And also, at the other end of the spectrum, people are living longer. We have the increasing life expectancy. Women postponing childbearing at the same time. Expect to see this trend to continue. Corporations have begun to offer some sort of, kind of elder care assistance to their employees, including seminars, referral services, and flexible work schedules. This is so significant, this population is so significant that President Obama spoke about it in one of his State of the Union addresses in 2010. Now we'll talk about divorce and remarriage. There are problems when it comes to measuring the extent of divorce in society. So we're going to talk about these various topics: divorce and mixed racial ethnic marriages, children of divorce, grandchildren, father's contact, the ex-spouses, and remarriage. When we look at the ways of measuring divorce, we can produce rates anywhere from 2% to 50%, depending on what numbers you choose to compare in measuring the U.S. divorce rate. The number of divorces in a given year to an entire group of married people will give you that 2%. But if you just examine the number of divorces as a percent of all adult Americans, that's where we get that approximately 50% of marriages ending in divorce. So this statistic can often be misleading because, with rare exceptions, those who divorce do not come from the group that married that year. When we compare the number of divorces in a given year to the entire group of married couples, the divorce rate is less than 2% of all married couples. So over time, these small percentages add up. So a third way of measuring divorce is to calculate the percent of all adult Americans who are divorced. So we can see how divorce has increased over the years and how race, ethnicity really makes a difference in the likelihood that couples will divorce. So for example, marrying outside one's racial ethnic group leads to higher divorce rates. Marriages between African American men and white women are the most likely to end in divorce. And there are lower rates of divorce that occur between Asian Americans and whites and white men and African American women. If we ask the percentage of people who have ever been divorced, the percent increases with each group and peaks when people reach their 50s. Overall, 43 to 46% of marriages end in divorce. And if we want to know what our risk of divorce is, research indicates that people who go to college, so these are the reasons that would decrease our risk. If we go to college, belong to a particular religion, have a high degree of religiosity, wait to get married, have children, have parents whose parents have not divorced, and have an annual income more than $25,000 a year, have a financial situation. So here we see a table illustrating that increasing in divorce among racial ethnic groups. Those characteristics that I just mentioned about what reduces the risk of divorce. And these are the percentages by which it would be reduced. Each year, more than 1 million children are in families affected by divorce. Compared with children whose parents are not divorced, children from divorced families are more likely to experience emotional problems, more likely to be juvenile delinquents, less likely to complete high school, and more likely to divorce. In a debate between two psychologists, Judith Wallerstein and Mavis Hetherington, Wallerstein claims that divorce scars children, making them depressed and leaving them with insecurities that follow them into childhood. Hetherington's study found that 75 to 80% of children of divorce function as well as children who are reared by both of their parents. Whichever way you look at it, there are children who need support, adjusting to divorce no matter how large or small the number. So these are definitely children who would need support. Several factors do help children adjust to divorce. Children adjust well if they experience little conflict, if they feel loved, if they live with the parent making a good adjustment, if they have consistent routines, and the family has adequate money or adequate finances for its needs. Also, children adjust better if they have a second adult that can be counted on for support. So another relative or a friend or a teacher or a coach. This is from Yuri Bronfenbrenner, his research. Researchers have found that adult children who come from a divorced family have a chance of a successful marriage if they marry someone whose parents did not divorce. Those marriages where both husband and wife come from a divorced family are more likely to experience high levels of distrust and conflict, leading to higher chance of divorce. Sociologists have found that the effects of divorce continue across generations. Sociologists Paul Amato and Jacob Cheadle found that the grandchildren of divorce have weaker ties to their parents. They don't go as far in school and they have marital conflict with their spouses. This is of a national sample compared grandparents who divorced versus grandparents who did not divorce. Fathers will have more who have more contact with children after divorce. Fathers who were married to the mothers of their children, who are older, who are more educated, and who have higher incomes, are more likely to continue to have contact with their children following divorce. And here we see the contact with children, whether it was frequent, minimal, there was a decrease in it or an increase in it. Women are more likely than men to feel that divorce gives them a new chance at life. The spouse who initiates the divorce usually gets over it sooner and usually remarries sooner. Many divorced couples maintain contact with ex-spouses because of their children. Divorce often results in economic hardships for women, especially mothers of small children. The former husband's standard of living is likely to increase. The more education a woman has, the better prepared she is to survive financially after divorce. Remarriage is now so common, 1/4 of married couples are on their second marriage. Most divorced people eventually remarry, although the length of time between divorce and remarriage is longer today than in the past. Most divorced people remarry other divorced people. Men are more likely to remarry than women. Those who are most likely to remarry are mothers with small children and women who have not graduated from high school. The divorce rate of remarried people without children is about the same as that of first marriages. Remarriages where children are present are more likely to end in divorce because marriage and family life is more complicated and stressful for those who bring children into a new marriage. And so here we see a pie chart illustrating the marital history of U.S. brides and grooms. First marriages at 60%, remarriages for both husband and wife is 20%, and remarriages for either a husband or wife is 20%. Next, we'll take a look at the two sides of family life, the dark side and the bright side. The dark side of family life includes spousal battering, child abuse, marital rape, and incest that represent the dark side of family life, or events that people would rather keep in the dark. First of all, spousal battering. Although wives are almost as likely to attack their husbands as husbands are to attack their wives, it is generally the husband who causes more physical harm to their wives. They are generally bigger and stronger. Violence against women is related to the sexist structure of society, and it is related to our socialization. To help curb violence, we need to focus on how we socialize both males and females to handle frustration and disagreements without resorting to violence. Child abuse. Well, each year, about 2 million U.S. children are reported to the authorities as victims of abuse or neglect. Upon investigation, approximately 750,000 of those reports have been children who have been abused or neglected. Marital rape is more common than previously thought, compared to victims of rape by acquaintances or strangers. Victims of marital rape are less likely to report the rape. Also, rape victims include those in cohabitating and lesbian relationships. These victims suffer shock, depression, and self-blame, both heterosexual and same-sex. Incest. Incest is sexual relations between relatives, such as brothers and sisters or parents and children. It is most likely to occur in families that are socially isolated and is more common than it previously was thought to be. Victims experience great trauma, especially when assaults occur over long periods of time and the assault is more intrusive. Sibling incest is more common than parent relative to the child. Most parents treat the incest as a family matter to be dealt with privately. On the brighter side are successful marriages. Now that we talked enough about divorce and abuse in families, I don't want to think marriages are doomed. 3 out of every 5 married Americans report that they are very happy in their marriages. In a study of couples who had been married 15 years or longer, they reported these factors as key to making a relationship successful. Number 1, thinking of their spouses as their best friends. Number 2, liking their spouse as a person. Number 3, having a commitment to their marriage. Number 4, seeing the marriage as sacred. Number 5, agreeing with their spouse on aims and goals for their future. Number 6, believing their spouse has grown more interesting over the years. Number 7, wanting the relationship to succeed. And number 8, laughing together. Sociologists have also found that marriages are happier when couples get along with the in-laws, finding leisure activities that they both enjoy and agree on how to spend money. While the statistics we look at are important in order to gain a deeper understanding of marriage and families in U.S. societies, it is important to remember that these are describing overall patterns and not individual cases. Our chances of having a successful marriage depend on our own situation, especially the way we as individuals approach marriage. From a symbolic interactionist perspective, we create our own worlds. We interpret our experiences and we act accordingly. If we think our marriage will fail, we increase the likelihood that it will. If we think our marriage will be successful, we are more likely to stick with it and do the things that will help make it work. We tend to act according to our ideas, creating a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. In spite of problems, marriage will continue because it's functional. The vast proportion of Americans will continue to marry. Many of those who divorce will remarry and try again. It is likely that cohabitation, births to single mothers, age at first marriage, and parenting by grandparents will increase. More married women will join the workforce and continue to gain marital power. Finally, more families will struggle with the demands of raising children and caring for aging parents. And we will continue to deal with the conflict between the bleak picture of marriage and family that is painted by the media and the rosy one painted by cultural myths. Sociologists can help correct the distortions through research, allowing us to see how our family experiences fit into the patterns of our culture. The question becomes, how do we formulate social policies that support and enhance the quality of family life?